Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the satsang once again. As you all know, these satsangs are based on an app that the monks in India created based on the autobiography of a yogi. You can get this on our website, on the Google store. It's for the Android for now. It has 365 extracts from the autobiography, one for each day. And generally, we pick up a couple of extracts each and talk a little about them. The one I chose, one of the conversations I have chosen for the 2nd of December, is from the chapter. For those of you who have read the book, it's from the chapter on the levitating saint, which is an interesting name because anyway, the quote from the levitating saint himself is as follows: I have left a few paltry rupees, a few petty pleasures, for a cosmic empire of endless bliss. How then have I denied myself anything? I know the joy of sharing the treasure. Is that a sacrifice? The short-sighted worldly folk are verily the real renunciates. They relinquish an unparalleled divine possession for a poor handful of earthly toys. And just to give a little bit of context, when Yogananda ji as a young boy, and I think he's in his teens, he's sitting with the levitating saint. One of the marks of that saint which Yogananda ji loved was humor. And everybody felt uplifted with his conversations. And so one of this levitating saint's disciples finally said, "Sir, you are so wonderful. You were born in a rich family, and yet how selflessly you have renounced everything just so you could serve us." And this conversation where the levitating saint is saying, "Wait a minute, don't pity me. I don't think I have renounced anything. I have gained an empire of endless bliss. While those people who forget where the true realities lie, and those short-sighted worldly folk, as the levitating saint says, who don't think of analyzing what the greatest potentialities of us human beings can be, they are the real renunciates, because for a few paltry pleasures, they have given up an empire of cosmic empire of endless bliss." So there are a few things here, and in some way, in this small conversation, there is one of the biggest teachings of yoga, and this teaching holds true in almost every other field. And I'll just give you an example which I think each of us goes through, especially if you are a parent. When your son is in the school, you always tell him, "Study well, son, get good marks, get an education," or whatever it is, especially here in India. And the son, sometimes he looks at some of his roommates, his classmates who don't really study much, who are spending all the time playing, enjoying, going out, talking, doing other things. And those people, when they see a studious student, they might sneer at him and say, "Look, there is a renunciant. He has renounced the pleasures of partying, of fooling around, of talking too much and enjoying life." But the wise parent says, "Son, 30 years from now, they will be the renunciants because they might not have a job, they might not have a stability. But if you study now, then when you grow up, you'll be able to enjoy life much better." And basically what the parent is telling is, don't think about the short-term gains and losses, but think about long-term gains. And we do this in all fields. We save money so that we have something for the future. And some people who are spendthrifts, they just splurge money. Many rich people have died poor. Many actors in the earlier years just splurged all the money they got, not knowing that they'll not always be the most preferred actors. And they have died bankrupt. So it is with this conversation here. Now, just a sec. If you guys move so much, it becomes very hard to talk. So it is with these conversations here that the levitating saint is saying. He calls many worldly people short-sighted, and he's saying just that simple thing. all we should do. And he is not criticizing worldly people, those who have businesses, responsibilities, families to take care of, but he said whatever the responsibilities are, we don't want to be short-sighted. Just as we save for our future financially, just as we think about our future educationally, so we have to think, well, this world and this current age, 30, 40, 50, whatever year, seems real now. But will it remain the same 20, 30 years from now? And the answer is no. And so the levitating saint, I guess, because of past samskars, very early in his life, he knew that just doing the duties of the world is not enough. That the final goal, the final possibility without which life can be full of regrets or a mixture of enjoyments and regrets, has to be found. That final goal is that cosmic empire of endless bliss. So all of us, Yogananda ji's path, luckily for us, was very well balanced. He did not say leave everything and find God, but he said do all the other duties you have to, of course, but spend time also through the technique of Kriya Yoga, through the right reading of these teachings, through occasional satsangs, pilgrimages, seclusions, in also approaching more and more that cosmic empire of endless bliss. So with that, I'm going to ask Devarshi ji.
This reading is from the December 7th, from the Autobiography of a Yogi Wisdom app. Swami Sri Yukteswar ji is saying to Yogananda ji in chapter 14, An Experience in Cosmic Consciousness. And this is just after Yogananda ji had the experience of samadhi. Devotees like yourself, who have found the way to God, never dream of exchanging him for any other happiness. He is seductive beyond thought of competition. And this chapter is one that is worth reviewing over and over again because it awakens within us, one, the intense desire for samadhi bliss, for union with God as bliss, but it also gives us an intuitive understanding of what that state is. And by awakening that intuitive sort of antenna receptivity to that state, it helps us to tune into that state and feel it and understand it. And I'm going to read the whole paragraph that Sri Yukteswar ji concluded just with this sentence that I just read. Ever new joy is God. He is inexhaustible. As you continue your meditations during the years, he will beguile you with an infinite ingenuity. Devotees like yourself, who have found the way to God, never dream of exchanging him for any other happiness. He is seductive beyond thought of competition. That word seductive, it just describes the intense attractive power of God. The Upanishads describe God as Rasha, the most relishable. And it's interesting in this chapter, in Autobiography of a Yogi, how many words and phrases work with this attraction, with the magnetism, with the divine feeling. I just counted today, there are 25 uses of the word bliss and joy in this single chapter of Autobiography of a Yogi. Those must be the two most commonly used words, in addition to love, in Autobiography of a Yogi. And so these describe divine feeling. Swami Kriyananda, near the end of his life, he said that God is feeling. And he was saying that God is not the study of the scriptures, God is not an idea or a philosophy or just an understanding. God is feeling. And then he went on to say that feeling is Satchidanandam, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. Now, there's another paragraph in here that is very interesting because it supports this concept and this understanding that we are working with the feeling of the heart in order to achieve this divine union. Yogananda ji writes, only adequate enlargement by yoga practice and devotional bhakti can prepare the mind to absorb the liberating shock of omnipresence. It comes with a natural inevitability to the sincere devotee. His intense craving begins to pull at God with an irresistible force. The Lord, as the cosmic vision, is drawn by the seeker's magnetic ardor into his range of consciousness. In this one paragraph that basically Yoganandaji is saying how to achieve the state of samadhi, 3 sentences long, he uses 6 words or phrases that evoke emotion and feeling. Devotional, he says, bhakti, sincerity, intense craving, magnetic ardor. What is ardor? I had to look that up the other day because I wasn't really sure what it is. It is intense passion, desire. And so this is the intense feeling of the heart that we need to awaken in order to find God. And when we awaken that intense desire and keep calling over the years, over the decades, it creates magnetic ardor. It creates magnetism that attracts the divine response. And so in a way, our job is to keep awakening this intense craving, yearning, self-offering, this ardor, and just churning it over and over and over again, like churning butter. And the difference is maybe that when you churn butter, which I've churned butter before, it takes some patience and some churning, and eventually the cream starts getting these hard sort of pieces in it, and eventually it turns to butter. And it's the same way with attracting the divine response. But that churning can take a long time. God tests the devotee. Sometimes there can be weeks, months, years, decades in between having a divine experience. But the devotee's part is simply to keep churning, and not worry. And I've experienced this with butter. Depending on the type of cream you use, temperature, everything, sometimes it churns very quickly, sometimes it's very slow, and you think it's never going to turn to butter. But if you keep churning at it, it eventually turns into butter. This intense craving and yearning and desire for God creates a very powerful magnetism. Yoganandaji himself had this magnetism as a boy. Swami Kriyananda writes that Yoganandaji's relatives told him that when Yogananda, even as a boy, he had such magnetism because of his own magnetic ardor for God, that if he was on a train platform, people, younger people especially, would just gather around him, drawn by his intense magnetism. And this is the power of this intense craving, yearning, this intense devotion for God. It eventually draws the divine response. Inevitably, it draws the divine response. And that's the beautiful promise in this reading here, which is that it comes with a natural inevitability to the sincere devotee. And this really is our part, is to keep awakening that longing. Now, interestingly, once you have a divine experience, which is what starts to awaken that longing, because until then you don't really know what you're longing for. And I think for anyone on the spiritual path, that experience has been awakened in former lifetimes or in this lifetime. But once that experience is awakened, you don't want anything else. You realize that nothing in this world will satisfy you. The catch is that some people, because of that, they have a world negating attitude only. They see that this world is a delusion. It's all duality and Maya, and so they reject the world. And that's just sort of the first step, and maybe even a baby step. Because if it's just negating, then there's nothing attractive about that negating approach. It has to turn into this intense craving and yearning. And once that starts happening, then it creates a very powerful positive magnet that attracts the divine response. So our part, very, very simply, is to keep working on churning, developing, creating, reviving that intense yearning and craving. And it's natural that devotees, even saints, go through dry periods where they don't feel God's presence. again, for years, and I don't want to scare anyone, but sometimes for decades, where you do not feel God's presence or response or call. But again, our part is not to ask, when is God going to come? It's simply to say, I'm going to sit here moment after moment, day after day, year after year, calling for you, Lord, and awakening this own magnetism in my heart until you respond, no matter what. There's a story of a young boy who went to a great master, and he wanted to become his disciple. And so the great master was testing the boy just to see if he was really ready. And so he took the boy over to a little pool of water, and he grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck, and he stuffed his head under the water and held it for a really, really long time, almost to the point where the boy almost drowned. And the boy was struggling and fighting to get up, and the saint, who had to be omniscient so that he didn't actually drown the boy, he eventually just pulled the boy's head up, and the boy was just gasping for air and just coughing. And the saint very calmly looked at the boy and said, "What is it that you wanted more than anything else at that moment?" And the boy just gasped, "Air, air, air." And the saint said, "When you want God that intensely and that badly, come back to me. Then you will be ready to be my disciple." And so if we can awaken that same intense craving, so that all we can think to say is God, 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 the way that boy said air, 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 then again, that is what eventually draws the divine response. And so this period of craving, there's also a certain amount of poignancy, maybe even of pain in there. There was a disciple of Yoganandaji who went to the master, and he said, "Give me samadhi." He was ready for samadhi, so he thought. A few disciples did this because they heard, of course, in Autobiography of a Yogi, Yoganandaji asking for it from his own guru. Properly, it's a good thing to ask for. One young man, asked Yoganandaji for samadhi, and Yoganandaji just kind of tapped him and said, "If I gave it to you, are you ready for it?" And the man just sort of slunk away and realized that he wasn't ready for it. Another boy asked him if he would get samadhi from him. And the Yoganandaji said something interesting. He said that if I gave it to you right now, he said, when you came down from that experience and from that state, you would not be able to bear your life anymore for the rest of your life. And the reason being that he wasn't yet ready to permanently be in that state, but the memory of that union with divine bliss would be so powerful and so strong that that boy would not be able to bear the rest of his life, because he would have come down from it so far. And so that is, in a way, I think we've all had that switch flipped inside of ourselves in some past lifetime, because there is, for the sincere devotee who's craving for God and yearning for God, there is a certain amount of pain in that feeling, because one knows that one doesn't have divine bliss. One knows what it tastes like. Maybe one has had some tastes of it in this lifetime, and yet one doesn't have it now. And so and this is why I think even great souls will sometimes turn to drugs and alcohol and other distractions just to kill that pain of that craving and that yearning. There was a great disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya who became a master, I believe, who reportedly was an opium addict before he came to Lahiri Mahashaya. And so if you're feeling this sort of push and pull, this drawing away from the world, knowing that it's not going to satisfy you, and then also having this intense craving that also hasn't been satisfied. Arjuna addresses this, asking Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, what will happen to the yogi? To myself, he was talking about himself as the sort of the everyman yogi. If I get onto the path of yoga, I leave the world, I meditate, I seek God, but I don't yet have God. And he said, I'll be like a cloud drifting away from the rest of the clouds all by itself, because I won't have the satisfaction of the world, and I won't yet have God. And I will have nothing. And that's sort of the part of the whole drama of the yogi devotee seeking God over many lifetimes. This is why Yoganandaji called it the divine romance. He said that it was the greatest romance story ever told. He said all other great romance movies and stories pale in comparison to this great divine romance, because this divine romance has lasted many, many lifetimes, as this beautiful song that Sagar sang, of searching for thee centuries and centuries, lifetime after lifetime. And again, our part is to have divine patience, to keep churning that butter, no matter how long it takes. If we keep churning it and churning it, it comes with, as Sri Yukteswarji or Yoganandaji said, with a natural inevitability to the sincere devotee. And again, our part is to awaken that sincerity, to awaken that magnetic ardor, to awaken that yearning. Spend time with other devotees. Somebody asked Yoganandaji, how do I develop that deep devotional yearning? And Yoganandaji said simply, spend time with those who have it. And that magnetism will also keep it alive in our own selves. And this is really the power of satsang. So the greatest thing that we can work with as yogi devotees who are seeking union with God, the ultimate divine samadhi bliss, is to keep this passionate desire for God awake in our heart. And when it starts getting dry, grab someone who's devotional and absorb some of those vibrations. As Yoganandaji said, a charcoal cannot get red by itself. It needs other hot coals. And so again, our part simply keep that fire awake, keep that yearning awake, and the experience comes with natural inevitability to all sincere devotees. And Sagar will now go on with the next.
So the second conversation from this app is for 3rd of December, and this is something Yoganandaji is quoting from the Adi Shankara. As soon as the knowledge, and it's very Adi Shankara like, which is a lot of jnana, as soon as the knowledge of the reality has sprung up, there can be no fruits of past actions to be experienced, owing to the unreality of the body, in the same way as there can be no waking after dream. And my first reaction for the next 15 minutes on reading this was to scratch my head and try to make sense of what Adi Shankara is trying to say here. So let's just read this once more. As soon as the knowledge of reality has sprung up, there can be no fruits of past actions to be experienced, owing to the unreality of the body, in the same way as there can be no dream after waking. And to put this into perspective, we can, again, it's nice to go back to the story and the chapter, which is We Visit Kashmir from Autobiography of a Yogi. And the particular thing that happened was Sri Yukteswarji, when he stayed back in Kashmir after Yoganandaji came back, and he went through a severe fever. He had told Yoganandaji, I'll go through this experience. And mostly not because he had the fever karma, but because he could free his disciples, Sri Yukteswarji's disciples, of many karmas by taking the burden on his body and burning them in that fever. And but the thing. Cancer, Ramakrishna, for example, just to give an example, Vivekanandaji went to him in the last years of Ramakrishna's life, and Ramakrishna had throat cancer, and so he asked Ramakrishna this question: Sir, you have this cancer, how are you doing? And Ramakrishna started explaining all the pain, I can't eat, I spew blood, and it's painful here, I can't sleep, I can't move my neck or throat, and this and that. And it was so gruesome, all the disciples started shuddering with each description. And Vivekananda, though, with each gruesome description, he was starting to feel this joy. And with the next gruesome description, the joy increased. And after 20 gruesome descriptions, it was so much, he finally said, "Sir, I know exactly how you feel. Even this cancer cannot touch you." And this state is what Adi Shankara is referring to here, where he says, once the body has been proved to be unreal by reaching Nirvikalp Samadhi, there can be no fruits of past actions to be experienced. In the same way, there can be no dream after waking. And so Swami Kriyananda often used to say this. Our goal right now, it's as if we are on a lake which has a lot of ice. And that ice represents our karma, which has to be melted. And he said, don't worry about first melting all the karma. All we have to do is drill a hole and get connected to the water underneath. And then at our pleasure, at our ease, that karma anyway doesn't affect you because you are united to the water beneath. It can be melted at its own pace. And this is the teaching that all saints and especially Yogananda ji emphasized. He would say, first find God. First know that the body is unreal. Then automatically, though the body might have to go through the motions of some karmas to help devotees to just work out cosmic law, you are not the body anymore. You have awakened. And just like when you see a movie, when the actor who's playing Jesus Christ, even when he's enacting all the agonies of Christ while being crucified and all this, he inwardly knows, I am just an actor, this is just a role. All this crucifixion is no more real than, a dream. And so he inwardly doesn't suffer. But if he plays his role well, he gets an Oscar. It happens the same to us. Once we are free, we get the Oscar of ever new joy. And outwardly, whatever the circumstances, we find that they do not touch us. So deepening our meditation and touching that one divine contact, and then deepening that divine contact, automatically all the other things get taken care of. So with that, I think we are almost, it's 8:30. So we'll see, thank you all for joining, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.